You do not have to publicly declare that you're a witch to be a witch.
Mm-hmm.
Like let's preface it with that. I mean, you and I are talking because we have platforms where we are doing this. But
Yes.
it is not required for you to reclaim power and use your own energy to create life on your terms. You can do that very secretly. You can label yourself a witch. You can give yourself no label, and you will still be just as powerful.
Mhm. All right, what is up, everyone? Welcome back or welcome to my channel if this is your first time. I am here with an exciting special guest today who is new to this channel. Tahverlee is her name, and she reached out to me recently, and we are here to basically talk about healing the witch wound, finding yourself on the witch path, and everything around that topic. She has, it seems, her own journey into witchcraft and spirituality, and has a lot of knowledge and wisdom to share with everyone about this. And so we'll kind of get this conversation going and hopefully hit some good points. So Taverly, I'll turn it over to you just so Zoom can pick up your face as well. And if there's anything you want to say to introduce yourself, please feel free to do so.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I really love to talk about all things related to how we can be the best version of ourselves and combining that and bridging it with our own awakening or our witch awakening or spiritual awakening and find the ways in which we have our own wounding that always gets processed when we up level, right? When we want to grow and be a better version of ourselves, whether or not you identify as a witch or a spiritist or a spiritualist
Mm-hmm.
or a pagan, any label you might use. A big piece of that growth process is going deep into the shadow murky waters to clear out the gunk so we can be more powerful, right? We can create
Mm-hmm.
excited about that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, definitely. So how long have you been, or when did you start on this path?
Oh goodness.
Towards, yeah.
It's always it's such a great question, and it's hard to give an exact answer. I can give you some examples
Sure.
of where I know that I swirled between the worlds, which started
Mm-hmm.
to like lead to little steps to awakening. Because I think most people don't necessarily have like one big gigantic witch awakening. I think
Mm-hmm.
that they are little steps along the way that happen that lead to clarity, that leads to more clarity, that leads to more clarity, and then all of a sudden you get to a place of the old labels that you carried to describe yourself don't fit anymore, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's even really present right now in the world because of so much change happening that we're all swirling through different identities and how we want to navigate what's happening. And so for me, I'll give you a couple of examples that I
Mm-hmm.
know to be true about me. Number one is that I was a seer my whole life without having any idea that that's what was happening. In fact, I didn't even know that not everybody lived like that. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
know that that's not how everybody's body processed information. I was 40 before I
Mm-hmm.
realized that it was actually something that is, unique to me in the sense that how I interpret the unseen worlds wasn't the same as everybody else. So I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I just had this way about me that definitely made me a little different growing up. It might have been described as being like driven or, clear or never having doubt what I wanted to do or that I would get there, but it wasn't really any of that. I had the ability to see what was possible and I had
Mm-hmm.
courage to just like take that action. But it's because I
Mm-hmm.
had that seer in me.
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting thing for me to think about in my own journey because I do think that all of us have the way our gifts come into us. And if
Mm-hmm.
we're not taught what it means or how it's working or what to do with it, it just gets slowly turned down as we get older. And then I think
Yes.
most people reach an age where all of a sudden it just gets turned back up and they're like, wait, I used to talk to dead people when I was a kid. My mom told me I was crazy. or, like all the different things that used to happen. So I know that that's been a part of me for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I also can recall a lot of times in, say, like my 20s,
Mm-hmm.
where I knew a lot of things were going to happen before they happened. And, um, my friend group at the time and the people that I was around, I started testing out telling people, like, you shouldn't do this. And I would explain why, especially if it was something that had a danger kind of feeling attached to it. And it was always true.
Mm.
And then if I kind of combine that with, from the time that I was born with my legs wrapped around each other like pretzels. So I
Oh
had
wow.
these full leg casts on my legs for the first few years, and then I ended up growing all kinds of like precancerous or some type of tumors in my
Mm.
body, and I've had 12 major surgeries. I have half of the organs I was born with,
Mm.
and I think that, and it never impacted me. Like I never was actually sick. I just had these physical things that were very, very painful, but it
Yeah.
never stopped me. So that's what I mean by kind of that drivenness. I think was born out of the idea that a lot of things in life that might have that might have been trivial to me if I had not gone through more difficult things just weren't they just weren't on my peripheral, so I could see a bigger picture. And honestly, some of the surgeries I had serious complications. So
Mm.
I will say that I visited the edge of that cliff,
Mm.
and
Mm.
I saw the valley, and I
Mm.
saw the cliff on the other side. I never went to the cliff on the other side,
Mm.
but I saw it.
Mm.
And that particular complication from a surgery was when I had a tumor removed from my breast, and I developed MRSA, like a staph infection that
Mm.
went into my lymph system. So I was pretty sick. This was
Yeah.
13, 14 years ago.
Mm.
And when I woke up after that and I was fine, and as I am, all these things that happen, I have been fine. Something shifted that time
Mm.
in the sense that I think that I considered the idea that if that was going to be the end for me,
Mm.
if that was going to be the end, I wasn't sad.
Mm.
I was ready to start departing wisdom to my, teenage children.
Mm.
I was ready to start departing wisdom. And I was also, I was able to reflect back at how hard I fought to keep my body healthy, considering it had been through so much. I felt like, man, I win the life courage prize. I win the prize of being able to endure pain.
Yeah.
And waking up after that, it changed my perspective. And that's really what pushed me down the path of starting to ask the question, is this all there is?
Mm. Mm.
And
Yeah.
I asked that question a lot in my lifetime. In that particular time, I allowed myself to say that question out loud. Is this all there is? And the
Mm.
moment I did that, everything changed. So
Mm.
I would say that that's really when I started going down the path of trying to seek um, meaning, magic
Yeah.
and mystery, like sit in the places of what I saw when I got to the edge of that cliff. And
Mm.
I don't consider it a near death experience, although it might have
Okay.
been, but it was just, when I was put under general anesthetic with this, emergency surgery, that's where I went.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, it by far wasn't the first time, but why was that time different? I think that just every time it just cracked me open a little bit more. And that's what I mean by these little steps led me along till I got to the place where I'm like, okay, if my time is limited, which all of our time is limited, and
Right.
I've been acutely aware of that for a long time. If our
Mm.
time is limited, then is this really what the fuck I want to be doing?
Mm. Mm.
And that's the is this all there is question that I pondered for a while. And the moment that I acknowledged that I wanted to see what more was possible, everything changed.
Mm.
And so that's, kind of a long answer, but
That's
that's,
okay.
yeah. And I think that that's the same for everyone. I think every time we experience a little bit of pain, something cracks us open. And mine just happened to be physical pain, but
Yeah.
pain cracks us open to something different. It takes
Yes.
us out at any type of, emotional, spiritual, heart, body, any type of pain. When you get to the other side of that in any way, shape, or form, you are different.
Yeah.
And that to me is a portal. to
Mm-hmm.
possibility. And a lot of people go through that pain portal and come out the other side and hold on to this is so terrible that this happened to me, and
Mm-hmm.
hold that victim. And I say it lovingly because that was me too for definitely periods of time. When
Mm-hmm.
we hold on to that, the door closes.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it seems like, when we don't hold on to it, when we are able to transform, that's alchemy, right? We're changing from one form to another. Like alchemy is the practice of changing a base metal into gold, and so essentially that's what this is too. When we do go through such painful experiences like that and are seeking something new, and we take that step, when we are open to it and accept it, whatever it is, into our lives, then there's a transformation that takes place. And I can relate in my own way, to being in a lot of pain at a point in time, which mine was more so emotional pain. But pain is pain, and that being sort of the trigger, I guess, the catalyst for change that propelled me forward on, just to seek, really, to seek something different. And because I didn't I like a lot of the things that you said. You touched on, how when you kind of had this awakening later on in life, you realize too that, oh, I was kind of doing this as a child, and are reminded of these things, these abilities, skills, whatever they may be. And I can relate to that too. It's like, oh, I kind of was like a psychic child. I kind of was like not kind of, I was. But I didn't think about that for so many years until I was brought back to those same abilities, and however that happened, and realize now that I'm more like my child self as an adult now than I was, earlier in my 20s or something. And not in the sense that I'm like childish. I mean, sometimes I can be, but in the sense that my childlike interests, like I'm on a path that is essentially, like you said, like, um being like following my highest good, my most authentic self, and chasing ultimately like the dreams that I want to achieve, and having that freedom and feeling that ability to do so. And so I have a question for you. When you made this change, when you started to identify yourself as a witch, or however you identified yourself, is your life now completely different than it was before, as far as, I don't know, everything or something, or like, whether it's your mindset, your spirituality, like what did it look like before, and was there any like religion involved, that you had to unlearn, or were there any unlearning processes or reprogramming taking place, in order to fully step on this path and devote yourself to that?
Great question. Religious, no, I didn't have a religious upbringing, and with my unique name, I'll tell you that my
Mm.
sister's name is Sunshine. So if that tells you anything
Oh,
about my parents,
yeah.
our version of religion was, how to live the hippie life. So
Okay,
I will
cool.
say that I didn't have that to unravel. In
Hmm.
fact, totally funny side story. This is hilarious.
Hmm.
When I was a young child, my family, obviously we're hippies, and I lived in a really small town in Colorado. And
Hmm.
do you know that when I was probably 11, 12, or 13, I used to get up on Sundays and walk myself to church?
Oh, wow.
And I would
Wow.
I would just this young girl, I'd have on my jeans and my boots, and I'd put on a flannel shirt, and I'd go sit in the back pew of a church with
Hmm.
local people, and I refused to go down to Sunday school, and
Yeah.
I just sat there and cried
Huh.
because I could
Mm.
feel. I don't know, even just I don't even remember a single moment of understanding anything that was ever said. All
Hmm.
that I remember is just sitting in the back of the church just crying because I could feel the
Mm,
energy of a holy place. And being a child that wasn't raised with any dogma or any religious conditioning, I
mhm.
I just got to experience the joy of prayer, like the feeling
Yeah.
of that. So that's a funny side story, but the
Yeah.
question about is my life different now? In a lot of ways, yes, and in a lot of ways, no.
Mhm,
My commitment to being of service in the community hasn't changed.
mhm,
My commitment to having a healthy, strong body hasn't
mhm,
changed.
mhm,
My commitment to having serious and deep and meaningful relationships hasn't changed.
mhm.
When I came out of the broom closet. I
Yeah.
did come out of the broom
The
closet.
broom closet. I like
Yeah,
it.
I did. It was a slow foray for me because I had started one of my two businesses that I have now. I had started one of my businesses and started a podcast and was doing a lot of work on empowerment for entrepreneurs, especially female entrepreneurs, because
Mm,
the statistics and support for what happens for female-owned businesses is really poor. So I really was supporting myself and bringing on a lot of guests, and I did hundreds of episodes just
mm.
on that topic. And one day, a woman who knew what I did after dark or on the weekends
Right.
told me that, you're only giving people half the recipe for success.
Mm.
You're leaving out this key ingredient to who you are and what you do. And I'm like, are you telling me to talk about magic? Like,
Right.
really? And it led me to evaluate like why was I afraid? I was afraid to come out with my practices. And at that time I was a competitive weightlifter, so I had a lot of different,
Mm,
communities around weightlifting. I'm
mhm.
also a Krav Maga instructor, so I was
Oh, cool.
heavily involved in Krav Maga. And then I had my like work friends, and then I had all my spiritual and witchy friends that I would do things with after dark and on the weekends, and shamanic drumming and do these,
Mm,
circles and all these rituals. And it was all separate.
mhm. Mm.
I didn't blend them. Like, I mean, I was putting sigils at the top of meeting notes for business meetings for years and would never let anybody see it or talk about it. I would do, rituals to connect to the spirit of the lands before I did a weightlifting competition or a like
Mm,
powerlifting or a strongman competition. I would
mhm,
do rituals to connect to the spirits of the land so I wouldn't get injured.
mhm,
And I didn't talk about it and I didn't share it. And then one day I remember this is really it's a funny little thing. I was sitting with my inner core of witch sisters, and by this time I had already been walking or had walked, I guess, my first initiate path as a high priestess.
mhm,
And we were all kind of hanging out one evening, and I'm rolling on an exercise ball, stretching my back, and I'm like, "Yeah, what do you think would happen if I started talking about, magic on my podcast? Do you think that everybody would stop listening?"
mm.
And they will tell you that story still today, that it was just this funny thing because I'm like upside down on an exercise ball in the middle of
Right.
the room, stretching my body and talking about fear, right? Of
Mm,
bringing this component in. And then I tested my feet in the waters and did a special of like oracles in October. And I interviewed all my friends that are witches without talking about myself. I
mm.
just interviewed all the other people that have practices. And that was it. All these, like I said, all these little doors open. And
Yeah.
I had a moment of time where I decided that I was going to sit down and have a serious conversation with people in my life that were religious or were not involved in any of my practices that I thought might be resistant
Mm,
to how I identify as a witch and what my practices are. And I did. I like sat down and had these coming out as a witch conversations with a lot of people, all in the period of like a month.
mm.
And I did it intentionally. I did it in nature. I did it over food. I did it over coffee. I did it with an open heart and love. And not a single person cared one bit.
Yeah. Right.
Half of them like, oh yeah, we're not surprised. You've always been kind of funky, or you
Yeah.
like that hippie life, or however they would want to word it. But half weren't surprised, and the other half just didn't care.
Mhm.
And I'm like, oh my goodness gracious. Here I've been like, holding it. And then, of course, there's different levels of visibility. That's your safe little circle of people that love you.
Right.
And then, right. And then coming out on a platform, like on a social media platform, say, for example, I tested that water and tested my
Mm,
podcasts and then tested it in other places and then tested it in other places and kept allowing it to get bigger until there were no boundaries anymore. And I didn't do that overnight. I took it slow. And I'm sure people came and went into my
Yeah.
field during that time, and yeah, that process is slow. It's an unwinding. And, you
Yeah.
mentioned at the beginning about the witch wound. And
Mhm.
this was I had a lot of experience with my own wounding around being seen,
Mm.
as a witch for a reason. And I also witnessed now, especially in mystery school, hundreds and hundreds of people face this all the time. Now, a lot of people that begin their spiritual awakening path or witch awakening path will
Mhm.
feel these little bouts of fear, due to religion or dogma or family beliefs. But there's
Mhm.
also this little deeper seated part that comes out that most of the time they don't realize that that's what it is. And even if you don't ever come out publicly,
Mhm.
it's not about that. It's about what lives inside of you. So I did a lot of work around that, and I still
Mhm.
do, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, very good. And it is shadow work, like you said in the beginning too. Which tell me and tell the viewers a little bit more about your moon temple mystery school.
Yeah.
And yeah, and just the work that you do and your business with that.
Yeah, we have two kind of distinct paths that we offer in mystery school. One of them is the high priest and high priestess lineage that I received that I carry forward. It is an initiate path. There's 13 steps that you walk, and it's a complete process of unwinding everything you've been taught to believe. And we start with alchemy. I'm also a certified alchemist, so I teach
Mm.
a lot of in-depth alchemy, and the rituals that come with this path are very different than anything I can possibly explain. They're mudras on your body, movements, language, creation energy, creating and moving circles.
Mhm.
And so there's words and movements, and um, it's a really powerful path. I do think it's probably the most transformational work that I've experienced and that I continue
Mhm.
to pass along,
Mhm.
because it's a deep commitment to understanding the elements, understanding your shadows, understanding how magic really works, and practicing it in real time in a group container, and then completing an initiation, which is always so powerful.
Yeah.
So that's one part. And then I have a lot of different sort of witch classes that I love to offer right now. In 2025, we're doing something called Summer of Spirits.
Mm.
And so we're doing two ceremonies a month plus a bunch of teachings on how to cross the veil safely and communicate with dead
Mm.
people, basically.
Mhm.
And so we're doing this 4-month journey, and it's so amazing.
Wow.
Late at night, we're all meeting on Zoom with our candles lit, and we're doing ceremonies and moving into open space and receiving information and coming back and sharing it. So
Mhm.
a lot of things like that come along. And I also do a lot of spiritual and psychic gift development classes, which is kind of separate to me from the high priest and the high priestess path.
Okay.
Not all witches are psychics, and not all psychics are witches.
Right.
And so I kind of teach them separately so people feel like they have options to choose from what suits them in that stage.
Mm, okay, very cool. Yeah, and that is a good point too that you made about not all psychics being witches and not all witches being psychic, because yeah, that is very true, and I don't know if a lot of people realize that. So do you feel that when you finally stepped out of the broom closet, which I love that term, coming out of the broom closet, and when you finally began to sort of merge all your separate lives together, did you feel when that happened that you were more showing up as your more authentic self?
Hmm.
Hmm.
Definitely. Yeah, I just copied a piece of my journal
Hmm.
into a document that I'm going to share in my newsletter. So, if people
Hmm.
go to moontempleschool.com and sign up for my newsletter, I do a lot of personal shares.
Hmm.
And the top of this journal entry is what is normal.
Hmm.
And I think through my life, the amount of times that I've been questioned or questioned myself or others have questioned, like, do I fit in this box that society wants us to fit in? And I was reflecting on a particular instance when someone said to me, you're really intimidating. Why do you have all your shit together? And I remember thinking to myself, wow, you think that I'm
Right.
that's wonderful. And and then I processed it, and that memory came up recently, so I journaled on it. And
Mm,
I ask myself questions in my journal often, like, how do I define normal? Like,
mm,
do I desire to be normal? And would normal make me feel more loved or like I could fit in?
mm-hmm,
And I ask myself like all these questions, and I go back and forth, and at the bottom of it, the answer is, well, if normal is average,
mm,
do you really want to be average?
right.
And so if that answers your question, I think that we have to question a lot of our beliefs, and a lot of our beliefs are related to how we desire to fit in. And why do we
Yeah.
want to fit in? It's because that's what we think we're going to do to be successful. And if we're successful, then we get love, or we get popularity, or in my book I reference, you'll reach a number one prize for success, and it will be pinned on your cold corpse when you die.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like that's what we strive for because that's what we're taught. And when you
Yeah.
unravel that a little bit, but still it still comes up a little bit sometimes because we're
Yeah.
human. We're meant to be human. So yeah.
Yeah. No, that does answer the question. And I think that when we are coming from an authentic place and we detach from that desire to be loved and seen, when we are able to accept that, if I show up authentically, not everybody may like me. And that's okay. Like I'm still showing up. I'm not trying to fit in somebody else's mold or align with somebody else's narrative. And there's a power that comes with that, when we are able to show up the same way every time, because or maybe not maybe the exact same way, but just being that authentic self, and not having to be a chameleon or put on masks anymore, because I hid for I hid, I guess, for a long time, the fact that I was a witch, and just the magic things that I do, and I still kind of to an extent do keep some of my things separate, because I do jujitsu. So that's cool that you are a
Oh yeah.
Maga
Hmm.
instructor. Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought about doing Krav Maga, but not to get too sidetracked. But stuck with jujitsu, and like that world, I sort of keep very separate than the world on YouTube and my spiritual practices and stuff. Which I have tried to blend it a little bit, just with like conversations with people, but it's not a strong desire yet. So it's a little kind of inspiring, with how you kind of had that same separation in your story, and we're like, let's just see what happens if I kind of blend them a little bit. Um and so with like the witch wound and reclaiming the witch path, for those that are on their journey of whether they're just open the door to magic, or are just having trouble like identifying, or not trouble with identifying with the term witch, but like for myself, there was a long period where I did the things that a witch does, but I did not call myself a witch because I was like, oh no, like I'm not a witch. Um, and so what I guess would be maybe your advice to people, or anything that helped you on your journey, that you may not have shared on already, with just like kind of getting out of your own way with that stuff, and being able to show up and say like, hey, yeah, I'm a witch, because I do feel too, like kind of going back to the witch wound, that it's a generational trauma, right? Witches were oppressed and killed and burned, um and myself personally, definitely do feel like past lives, as with some sort of spiritual or magical practice. I don't know if I was a witch burned at the stake, maybe. I haven't necessarily connected with that life yet, and maybe you have a similar thing where it's more of like an ancestral wound as well. But for anyone that's on that path, regardless of if you have like a past life with it or not, there's that collective witch wound that still exists, right? Where they do hide in the broom closet because of like the what they've faced in the past. And so And I guess like with my YouTube channel, sorry, this is a long-winded question, but with my YouTube channel, that's one of the ways that I try to inspire people already that are walking this path or walking their own path is showing up, doing what I do, and you do the same, on your channel, doing what you do, and saying like, hey, it's okay. Like I'm putting myself out there, and this is what I do. The extent of my practices, um, and surely people see that and they either resonate with it or they don't, but the ones that do are hopefully inspired to not be afraid to express themselves in that way too. And not to say that they need to go make a YouTube channel and share all the things about it, but just that they feel more comfortable in their own skin with it. So is there anything, and maybe this is something you do in your, I think you did say, you mentioned it in your that you do in your moon, is it Moon Temple Mystery School, with helping people break out of those shadows. But what are kind of some of the methods, I guess, that you use to do that, really?
So many questions in one question.
I know, I'm sorry. Yeah,
That's
yeah,
okay.
just do your best
I'll
to
go.
answer.
I'm gonna go back and just say the first thing that came to me when you were asking this question, and that
Okay.
is you do not have to publicly declare that you're a witch to be a witch.
Mm-hmm.
Like let's preface it with that. I mean, you and I are talking because we have platforms where we are doing this. But
Yes.
it is not required for you to reclaim power and use your own energy to create life on your terms. You can do that very secretly. You can label yourself a witch, you can give yourself no label, and you will still be just as powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there is something there when you are afraid to use the term witch because it brings a charge in your body.
Mm-hmm.
And that charge isn't just generational trauma that you reference, which is all very true. And I know about many of my past lives, and
Mm-hmm.
I'll talk about that in a moment. It's
Mm-hmm.
not just the generational trauma, it is what vision you've been told by Hollywood that a witch is.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of factors, and not to mention what happens in, religious traditions about witches and
Right.
psychics. All of these things together have put this shroud of bad, right? Which is being bad.
Mm-hmm.
And if that brings a trigger in your body, if you are not calling yourself a witch or identifying that that's part of your practice because there's a trigger, then it's worth going into exploring why. Now,
Mm-hmm.
there's lots of reasons. I know lots of very powerful witches that would never talk about it outside of the confines of their own little temple
Mm-hmm.
because they don't need to, they don't want to. It's their
Yeah.
choice, right? They're sovereign. I mean, practicing witchcraft is sovereignty at its
Yes.
core. And there are still 13 countries in the world where you can be tried and incarcerated for practicing witchcraft. So
Oh, wow.
the fear where we live is not real, but it is real in some parts. And it's
Yeah.
still, maybe since 2020, it's become a little bit more palpable to
Mm-hmm.
identify as witchy, right? And you can see witchy stuff in like mainstream stores. And so it's a little different now, but the vision that most people hold of what a witch is probably not their own.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, I would go to your body. If you feel that you feel like you are desiring to, have more of that witch awakening or that witch experience in your life, but you have a little charge around it, then
Mm-hmm.
go into it and explore all the reasons why. And that's some deep work.
Yeah.
And the witch wound itself contains all of that and more, right? The witch wound isn't just the generational trauma that we carry for the amount of mainly women that were killed for probably not all of them even being witches, but just because they were sovereign or outspoken or healers or whatever the reason is.
Yeah.
But there's another facet to the witch wound that often, actually, two facets that we can talk about that often get forgotten in the witch wounding category.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them is that a lot of us were also those that did the persecuting in past lives.
Mm-hmm.
We think that the witch wound is just those of us that have died for doing it in a past life or our family, but actually it's probably more likely that someone in our lineage or us in a past life, we did the persecuting
Oof.
because it oftentimes if you had to choose between keeping your children alive or pointing out a witch on your block,
Right.
right? And
Yeah.
that brings in a lot of sister wounding too, because a lot of women, you know, turned in other women or accused other women. And it brought in all of this trauma between women and between trust and safety and like being your whole self as a woman that's powerful,
Yeah.
especially healer women. I mean, those that do a lot of work, um, especially around the areas of womb or childbirth or
Mm-hmm.
in herbalism or natural medicine,
Mm-hmm.
they were the first to get reported, and most of the time it was other women.
Mm-hmm.
And so the witch wounding that we carry, most of us, is probably more related to those of us that did the persecuting.
Mm.
Because, and it could be because you didn't have a choice. So it doesn't mean you're doing it to judge yourself or your family. Just
Yeah.
understand that, when that push comes to shove and you have to choose between keeping your child alive or giving somebody something that they want. I mean, if a life is going to go, how do you choose? Hard
Yeah.
questions. So
Yeah.
this is not to judge. It's just to remember that we weren't always the good witches. We weren't always the good ones.
That's so true. And I honestly got chills when you said that about being the ones that did the persecuting. And to me, that's just an indication of like spiritual truth and confirmation. And I had never thought of that. That's the really great perspective to put on it, and very true, because a lot of how we show up in this lifetime has to do with these maybe karmic dynamics from past lives, and like whatever struggles that we face, whether or not it's with the witch path or whatever, it could be anything, in a past life or another lifetime. It could be that the roles were reversed, and
Mhm.
the victim that we may be in this lifetime, if we claim victimhood, we could have been the abuser in the past, but that
Mhm.
makes that wound still that much deeper,
Mhm.
and so now the tables have turned. So that's a really, I love that you said that. That's a really great perspective to add to it.
I actually think sometimes that probably a lot of us, like you and I, that do this work publicly, we probably were not on the right side of what we believe witchcraft to be now, which is why we're doing it in such a big way now, because we're
Mm-hmm.
clearing or bringing balance between our lifetimes. I think that that's possible. I don't know that to be for sure, but I do know that the assumption that the wounding we carry is just because we were the victim, somebody did us wrong, and I think, oh, that's sweet.
Yeah, right.
That's sweet. And the other piece of that that's important to remember is that when you start awakening, whether it's even just a spiritual path and the word witch is like far away from you, that wounding between women arises a lot. There
Mm-hmm.
we haven't really been given the opportunity to really heal those sister wounds, and it's made worse by being in competition with each other from the time we're in school, that that the piece of bread that we all think we're going to get at lunch, that we have to be better than each other, or
Yeah.
telling each other and make them feel bad in order to get a piece of bread, which actually isn't true, but we've been raised that way.
Yeah.
So these are the things that you start to dismantle. And I will say that the moment you own, even just in your heart and inside your own breath, that you're a witch, all of this starts to dissipate. So, you don't have to call yourself, you don't have to do anything because you're sovereign. You can do whatever you want. But when you bring that word into your body and into your heart, you start just naturally clearing things out. The word has power. It
Mm-hmm.
has power to strip you away from things that you didn't even know were stopping you. And I like the word power because it makes a lot of people uncomfortable, just like the word witch.
Yeah.
But when you start using the word witch, you become so much more powerful inside of you because you're claiming thousands and thousands and thousands of years and putting it to bed and not allowing that trauma forward.
Yeah.
And of course, there's lots of other things you can do. And I think that was ultimately your question. What do you
Yeah,
do?
I know. Yeah, no, it's okay. Yeah, we're just conversating at
Yeah.
this point. So I
Yeah.
know that last question was like a ton of questions in once, but yeah, I think we touched on it. So, and I also like what you said about um, how really it's just about accepting or incorporating or finding resonance with the word, with witch, um and identifying with that and not having it cause some sort of trigger or discomfort in your body anymore. And that can be done in the privacy of someone's home. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm, like I said earlier, I'm in no way like wanting, by doing what I do, like wanting people to go out and like proclaim that they're a witch, like no, it doesn't have to do that. It's your own like spiritual practice. It's your own connection with higher forces, or with elements, and whatever path you choose. Um but it's really the main importance is about, like you said, integrating and sort of alchemizing that word with us, because it is powerful. It really is. And I don't even know if I can really speak on how powerful it is, other than just like the shift that took place in myself when I identified with, when I stopped having that discomfort of my own with calling myself a witch. I felt more powerful in my practices and in my connection to the elements and to the spirits and to whatever I was doing, and just to myself too. Because, like you said too, it just stripped away things that weren't authentically aligned with me. And not that everybody's a witch and not that this is everybody's path, but for those that it is, I think it's important to have these sorts of discussions in order to embrace something that has been feared for so many generations and has so much fear and stigmas around it still, because of like Hollywood and all the things. Because it's not about, like there's a reason that Hollywood portrays witches in such a way. There's a reason for these things, because they want it to still be something that is is feared, so that people don't aren't inclined to go chase it, because they know, whoever they are, know that by choosing that a lot of people will find that inner power, and will find out, like figure out that, oh, I am actually like more powerful than I've been told my whole life, and I can, I have these abilities that I don't didn't I'm not familiar with yet, but that are ultimately like connect me to something that's beyond the physical world. And there's a lot of energies out there. There's a lot of people out there that don't really want people that haven't wanted, I think maybe it's changing a little bit now, but haven't wanted humans to know about like this connection to the spirit world, or know about the magic that we can do, the magic we can have in our lives, the magic that we can create, and I do feel that that's changing a little bit, especially like with technology and like with more conversations being had, and not to be cliche, but just like the collective awakening and stuff. But for a lot of people, it still is a reality, and because that narrative has been so strongly and carefully crafted, that it runs deep for a lot of people, and and so there's a lot of, yeah, just a lot of unlearning that goes along with that. So, I know you mentioned like,
Wait, we got to pause. That was
okay.
beautiful.
Oh, well, thank
That was
you.
beautiful.
Thank
I'll
you.
just say that when you contain and hold and use your own power, you are very difficult to control.
Yes.
So you're talking about the systems that want control, someone that's in charge of themselves and that's sovereign and that knows how to utilize their own power in life to create, to heal, to be. Ooh, that's scary. Even now, it's still scary.
Mm-hmm.
It's been scary to those powers that be for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I really appreciate, that the work that you do on your channel too, is to help people ultimately like reclaim that power, and by reclaiming the witch path, like what that's truly what that means is reclaiming that sovereignty, reclaiming your own power, to realize that we are powerful forces, that are nearly impossible to control when we
Mm-hmm.
step into that power.
Mm-hmm.
And and ultimately, like, that's the level of awakening I feel that needs to take place in the world at this time, and everybody's path is different, everybody's story and journey is going to be different, but there are truths that hold that remain truths, regardless of what the path looks like. Like, truths will always remain the same. And and so yeah, so I really, I know we're kind of wrapping up on time a little bit, but so a couple things. Is there anything that you want to touch on about past lives? I know we kind of talked about that, but if you
Ooh,
think that's
yes.
relevant, yeah, then go
Well,
ahead
the
and.
the Akashic records, yeah.
Mhm.
First, I'll just say that the purpose of understanding your past lives, which in my experience, I do Akashic records come into some of my one-on-one readings, but it's not a specific area that I focus on. I think Akashic records readers are their own breed of magic in their own, and
100%.
I've had some beautiful, amazing Akashic records readings. And you want to know what's interesting? Is
Mm.
pretty much the four or five same past lives come up in every reading with different people.
Hmm.
And I use this as an example to say that how we're living out now, right now in this particular timeline, is
Mm.
directly related to specific previous timelines. And when you understand a little bit more about what happened, and of course, you could have a 200 past lives. So, a good reading can really only go into a couple at a time. And for me,
Sure.
that's usually like a lot to digest. That's years worth to digest. But the few that usually, good readers bring out are the ones that are most applicable in this lifetime. And when you're basically just learning about yourself, you're studying yourself,
Mm.
just learning about yourself, like a good Akashic Records journey or trip or reading, or
Mhm.
if you know how to get into the records, and you can get into the records, there are guardians of the records, you can do it yourself. But when you go in there and you pull out certain information, it's for you.
Mhm.
And anytime that we do something that studies ourselves, like why are we the way that we are, outside of genetics and family conditioning, there's a whole big field within us that is unknown. And when you start to experience it, it's like, whoa, you learn a lot about yourself. And again, those are just pieces of power you pull in. And they're also things that you let go of because you
Mm.
realize, well, okay, in this lifetime, I'm probably not going to do that. That lesson doesn't serve me in this lifetime. I'm willing to let that one go, but it tells me a lot about who I am,
Yeah.
why I'm experiencing this, why I believe this, why I'm so passionate about this, why I hate this. Like all these
Mhm.
things, like you can understand emotions and then bring them to neutral. So
Yes.
I definitely always recommend, at some point along anyone's path of awakening of any type, to spend some time getting to know your past lives.
Mhm.
And whether or not you believe it is okay, like there's no downside to learning it. You can cast it aside if it doesn't feel like it fits for you, but there's a place to learn about yourself. I mean, this whole path is learning about yourself, and that's just
Yeah.
another facet that I think is powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've had an Akashic Records reading in the past by one person, and they really are their own breed of
Mhm.
psychics or people. Like you said, I've really only ever
Yeah.
met one in real life, and it was a really powerful reading. And we are such multifaceted souls,
Hmm.
with multiple lifetimes worth of information. And it's so interesting how, not that I've connected with all of my past lives either, yet, or if I will in this lifetime, but how we find resonance with certain things, and likes and dislikes. And I've heard in other systems of beliefs that that's one indication of something that we have maybe done in a past life, is if we do have a really strong interest in it in this lifetime, or if we have a really strong like dislike, or passionate hate for something, and in this lifetime, it's probably because we've experienced it before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It can also just hold wisdom that you can call forth.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That you forgot when you reincarnated again. We hold
Yeah.
wisdom in those lifetimes and we can call them forth into now. It's like you can
Mm.
collapse timelines of your lifetimes and bring them all forth. And that's where you start to see and experience um, like the energy of like the oracle, right? Like an oracle
Mm.
can pull in all lifetimes wisdom without needing to know all the drama details of it, but there's wisdom. Like it's like it's like there's little hidden golden nuggets, like little Easter eggs in every past life, and you see one and you're like, oh, I'm bringing that here now.
Yeah.
I'm gonna bring that into this lifetime and live with that with me awakened. So
Yes.
that's another facet to it for sure.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So I have a couple more questions, and then we'll wrap up. Which I'm honestly guilty of saying that in a lot of interviews, and then but this time I will keep it at just a couple questions. So do you feel at this point in time and where you are on your path and with the work that you do that you are showing up as your most authentic self?
Hmm. I would say that I'm still learning
Mm-hmm.
about the parts of me that are unexplored, as we all
Mm-hmm.
are. And one of the ways that's happening for me is writing the books that I'm writing, as
Yes.
we've touched on, and
Yeah.
I'm being stretched in new ways, of expressing myself. And I'm not just writing a recipe book on spells and rituals. I'm sharing very deeply personal stories.
Mm-hmm.
So the readers can feel and experience the times that I really fucked it up and the times that I, got it really, really, really amazingly, magically right, and
Mm-hmm.
everything in between. Because I think that it's important for us to know to have context sometimes and why and where magic would be used and how it would be helpful, because it's not just about manifesting. There's so many deeper layers that it's that part's stretching me. So I've been wanting to write like these types of books for a really long time. So I'm stepping into a part of my calling that
Mm-hmm.
for whatever reason I haven't done until now.
Yeah.
Um, I think that as I'm getting older, how I define authentic is very different.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm a grandmother now.
Oh, wow.
I have two grandbabies, and being a grandparent and being able to experience that new level of love is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a new side of me that's coming out to play.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point, and I don't think that it means that there's any inauthenticity going on, but there's just like you said unexplored parts of ourselves, and the more that we carry on in life, the more that we evolve, the more things that we do, the older we get, the more comes up. And I think there's just maybe this ever expanding process into our authentic selves. And maybe I don't know if, well, if we're already on that path, maybe we do reach a level and a point in time where we're like, all right, yeah, but we're always changing. So,
Yeah.
the authenticity goes with those changes too, I believe.
But I would say that I don't think that I'm living in a way that there's any inauthentic parts of my life.
Right.
Right? I don't allow that. I made the decision a long time ago in all facets. It just, I hold myself with pretty tight agency of
Hmm.
how I want to live my days and the work that I do and the people I surround myself with and where I live and how I travel and what all the things. I hold that pretty tight.
Yeah.
I don't allow inauthenticity into my field very often. Um, and it's an interesting way to live because a lot of people don't live that way. So I bump
Exactly.
up against a lot of people's disharmony over my choices. And that's all of us, our paths to be so dedicated to ourselves and the things that we're passionate about and what we love, and not being dedicated to the things that aren't that.
Yeah.
That's a lifetime of work.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so you kind of touched on what my next question was going to be already, but tell us more about the book that you are having
Yeah.
republished. Yeah.
So it's a really a great story. So I self-published my first book called Sacred Magic, and I know it's pretty dark in here. You can't see it. There's a copy up there.
Okay.
Um, I self-published my first book and did this great big release, and it was wonderful, and sales were going great. And through a really interesting path of synchronicities, I ended up meeting someone who worked for Llewellyn, who Llewellyn Worldwide, which is one of the largest magic and mystical publishers in the world. They've been around since 1901.
Mm.
Introduced me to someone who opened a conversation with me, and I explained the projects. And to make a long story short, I they offered me a multi-book deal for book one, because book one is the element of Earth to the north, and the other
Mm.
books are all in each cardinal direction. So it's a four-book
Oh,
series,
cool.
and they picked up the whole series. So I took down my self-published book, which is just, it's still crazy and wild and wonderful. And Llewellyn is awesome to work with, and I'm honored to have my name alongside so many other authors. And
Hmm.
to be honest, I wasn't seeking traditional publishing. And I'm really glad that I did it the way that I did it, that I self-published it and went through all the pain and all the learning and all the things, because it made me a better author. Like, I learned so
Mm.
much. There's so many things that I didn't know. And now I get to sink a little deeper just into the love of writing, and I
Yeah.
want to keep getting better. And so I want to keep writing. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
so in the spring-ish of 2026, book one will be re-released, followed by book two, three, and four. And
Excellent.
then, I have a whole wall over here to the right of me of other book outlines that have
Mm.
already started coming through. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'm gonna keep writing. I'm
Cool.
gonna keep
Yeah.
writing. Yeah.
Very cool.
And if anybody signs up for my newsletter list on moontempleschool.com, or I actually have a book wait list, which is just my first name.com, tahverlee.com, then I can keep everybody updated when my books come out if you're interested.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm definitely interested. So
Yeah.
that's really incredible that they picked it up and everything, and that you have this calling to write more now. You know,
Hmm.
writing is a very powerful medium. It's a very powerful craft, to dedicate yourself to, and you reach a lot of people in that way too.
I love it. My soon to be 25-year-old daughter, she loved it so much. She's like, this is really great, Mom, because when you're getting older and you can't do anything else, you can always still write. I'm
Yeah.
like, I just,
I mean,
it cracked me up,
well,
right? Like a 25-year-old's perspective. It's like, okay, Mom, when you're old and you can't do anything else, at least you can still write.
yeah.
It
Well,
was
that's
really, but it was really cute the way that she processed it. Yeah, it was great.
yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well, very cool. Yeah, I'm excited for those, and that's really a huge accomplishment, and a great journey, a great process for you too to go through, like you said, with the like self-publishing, and
Hmm.
then yeah, learning a lot from that experience, and then having an even better experience come after that, which was
Hmm.
unexpected and unplanned.
Yeah.
So,
Sometimes some unexpected and unplanned, but, or let me say, and
hmm,
I wouldn't have gotten there if I hadn't done the steps that I did to get there.
right.
Right? Like, unexpected and unplanned never means it drops out of the sky.
Yeah.
Right? I think of all things, even magic rituals and spells, and maybe this is a good note to end on, is
Hmm.
I think the best outcomes of powerful spells or big ceremonial magic or high magic or rituals, they are a sequence of events that you surrender to, and you get the awareness of the thing and the idea, and you hold it and you integrate it, and then you take the action. And self-publishing my book was that. It was just a long time and a lot of commitment and a lot of time. And then, in my free feeling of, wow, I did it,
Hmm.
something great came. And it didn't just drop out of the sky. It came because I had already done all of
Yeah.
those steps. And I think that that really is how really powerful spells and rituals work. And that's how I teach them. Is I prefer to see people put things in place that are measurable, that take
Yes.
time in contemplation, that are that have a full integration in them, that have follow-up steps included. And really, those types of formulas for spell work specifically, nothing is off the table,
Hmm.
you know?
Hmm.
And that just kind of blows a lot of people's minds.
Yeah, yeah, it really does, and yeah, and a lot of people I feel with magic sort of expect it to just poof appear
Hmm.
and happen,
Hmm.
but that's not realistic. Like there are steps there's aligned action that needs to be taken in order to assist the magic to make it more powerful, and then the magic can, still show up in unexpected ways.
Yeah.
But it doesn't just come from us sitting doing nothing to.
And sitting back, right? That passiveness. Well, there's a
Yeah.
great tale. I don't even know what author brought this forward, but there's an author out there that shared this Buddhist story. And the Buddhist story is, I when a Buddhist met God, the
Hmm.
Buddhist said to God, I don't understand. You told me in this lifetime that I was going to get all these things and I was going to be able to do all these things. And so every day I woke up and prayed to, I think it was like win the lottery. I woke up and prayed for this thing. I prayed every single day. And you promised me that I was going to get that thing. You promised me. Like I prayed every day for all these years and nothing happened. Like, why? And God came back and said, well, all you had to do is buy a ticket.
Oh, yeah.
And it's this crazy thing, right? That we do that. We
Hmm.
go out and we pray and we cast spells. And not that I'm saying prayer is spell work. For
Right.
people who have confusion around that,
Yeah.
or the fact that I use God, you could say goddess, whatever you want, whatever
Yeah.
universal source. Um,
Hmm.
but there are things that we need to do to align ourselves always.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, totally. Well, this has been a really great conversation, and it's been such a pleasure to connect with you and talk to you and hear some of your story. And I really hope that, people are interested in the work that you do. I know I am, and especially in your books coming up. I'm a writer myself and don't have anything published yet, but I
Yet,
love, like,
yet,
yes,
yet.
yes, yeah, it's a work in progress, but it's happening.
I
And
love it.
yeah, and so I'm always happy and excited to connect with like other writers too. So that's really a really cool thing. And so, is there anything else that you want to share with anybody just before we close? Any advice, any tips, or just anything? And if there's nothing,
Any,
that's okay.
let me just feel like what's on my heart right now,
Yeah.
like what's in my body. I would say that the rest of 2025 is going to continue to be a rapid changing year.
Mm,
And I'm using that word specifically. So if you picture the fact that we are all going through rapids in a river, that you have a couple of choices, right? You can be the rock in the center of the rapids where the water just keeps pounding on and pounding on, pounding on, and you're holding tight and not willing to change your move, and you're just going to get beaten up and worn down.
mm-hmm,
Or maybe you're going to be the bank of the river where the grass is trying to grow high towards the sky, but somebody just keeps taking its soil away and then it just keeps dying.
mm-hmm,
Or you can be the salmon that are trying really hard to swim upstream because they just want to get back to where the cooler waters are, and you're working and you're not moving but you're just constantly going upstream. Or you can be like any of the other wildlife in the water that just goes with the flow, that just
mm,
sits in this fast-paced energy and lets yourself move. And I say that because when you start moving with fast-paced energy, when you are in a fast-paced energetic year, things can happen fast,
mm-hmm.
but only when there's no resistance.
Yes.
And some ideas of what resistance is right now is doom scrolling, media, like staying too long in sources that aren't joyful. And I'm not saying to ignore and not be wise and educated on what's happening in the world, definitely, but finding balance and finding ways to keep your center, right? Keep your
Yes.
center and stay grounded allows you to move with that fast-paced energy. And when you're aligned and grounded, then cast those spells, put those
Mm-hmm.
big workings out there because you have the support of change. Change energy is alchemy. And when it's happening fast, things can happen fast. And that's what I'd
Mm-hmm.
like to share is my advice for the rest of 2025.
I think that's fantastic advice. Yeah, I always choose like I'm not a New Year resolution type person, but I'm like a focus word of the year type person. And last year my word was presence, just to practice being more present. And this year my word is flow. And
Mhm.
I'm realizing more and more every day just how important that word is to practice, because I too am guilty of, putting up some resistance at times and trying to run the show. And it's a daily lesson. It's a daily, to to get out of my own way and to stop resisting and to learn to move with that energy, like you said. So I think that's beautiful. I think that's really important.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Thank you so much for having me. This has been such a pleasure.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I hope we connect again at some point, sometime soon. And thank you to everybody who's watched this video, made it this far in the video. I hope you got something from it. I hope you were inspired. I hope you enjoyed Tahverlee's story. And, hopefully you're not a stranger on this channel. For anything, I'd be love to have you back sometime and discuss more things like this. So
Thank you.
cool. You're welcome. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And until next time.